March 17, 1943. In the midst of war, an intelligence report lands on the desk of Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, shaking the very foundation of Nazi beliefs. A single, seemingly improbable fact. The United States, a nation newly entered into the war, was producing bombers at a rate that would soon overwhelm the Axis. The year is 1943, and the world is consumed by the flames of World War II. In Berlin, the Axis powers wage their relentless battle for dominance. The German High Command is poised on the brink of their greatest miscalculation, an error that would doom the Third Reich to ultimate defeat. The United States, a vast and seemingly unwieldy nation, has harnessed the power of its industrial might, turning out aircraft with a speed that stunned German intelligence. The Ford Willow Run plant, a factory in Michigan, is producing bombers, specifically the B-24 Liberators, at a pace that Germany cannot comprehend. It is here that the fate of the war begins to shift, as the Nazi leadership refuses to believe the unthinkable. The United States is capable of outproducing them. Commander of the Luftwaffe, Hermann Göring, dismisses the intelligence as American propaganda. He believes that no nation can produce such complex machines at a rate faster than the German war machine itself. Despite growing evidence and warnings, the Nazi leadership, including Hitler himself, continues to underestimate the scale of American industrial production. As Nazi forces are entrenched on the Eastern Front and in North Africa, the true battle for supremacy lies in the skies. Yet, the German leadership remains blind to the threat that is already looming over them. This failure to grasp the full scope of the American industrial miracle would become one of the most significant intelligence blunders in history, with consequences that would eventually lead to Germany's collapse. But why did they ignore the truth? What happened when the intelligence about American production finally reached the highest ranks of the Third Reich? As the camera pans across the darkened streets of Berlin, the tension is palpable. Canaris, one of the few who understands the truth, contemplates the future of his country, knowing that the war could soon be lost not on the battlefield, but on the assembly lines of Detroit. The war is escalating. The battlefield is shifting. The world is caught in the whirlwind of military strategies, with the Axis powers struggling to maintain control and the Allies finding new ways to turn the tide. Yet, within the heart of Nazi Germany, a slow-moving realization begins to emerge, a realization that threatens to shatter their confidence and alter the course of the conflict. By the spring of 1943, the United States had entered the war with a newfound resolve. While the German military had spent years preparing for battle, the Americans had transformed their factories into war machines. The Ford Willow Run plant, located in the heart of Michigan, was producing B-24 Liberators at a staggering rate of 1 per hour. The speed and efficiency of the production process were unprecedented, and it would soon become clear that the United States had tapped into an industrial power that Germany simply could not match. Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, chief of German military intelligence, has seen the reports. He knows that something is wrong. His own agents, embedded in Mexico City and other parts of the Americas, have been sending him contradictory information. One source, a German agent in Detroit, claims that the Willow Run factory is operating at full capacity, cranking out aircraft at a rate that defies logic. Another report from a Mexican businessman, sympathetic to the Germans, insists that Ford's production lines are unlike anything seen in Europe. Canaris' mind races as he tries to piece together the puzzle. He reads through the reports again, tracing the intricate details. It becomes undeniable. The Americans are building bombers at a rate that could overwhelm the German Luftwaffe and change the course of the war. But still, Göring and other top Nazi officials refuse to accept the truth. "You must be mistaken," Göring insists, waving off the information. "We have our spies everywhere. There is no way the Americans can produce such quantities of aircraft. This is just propaganda." But Canaris is not so sure. He knows the facts are staring him in the face, and he cannot ignore them any longer. The realization is haunting. The war in the skies is about to be altered by a force that Germany cannot defeat with tanks or planes. The true weapon is not a fighter jet or a battleship, it is the American production line. For the next few weeks, Canaris will fight to get the attention of those in power, but he is met with resistance at every turn. Even as he presents photographs and detailed reports from multiple sources, including American workers who had unwittingly become informants, the Nazis refuse to believe the evidence. They dismiss it as lies, as exaggerated claims of American propaganda. As Canaris digs deeper into the intelligence, he stumbles upon something even more astonishing: the U.S. production is not only exceeding anything seen before, it is doing so with a labor force that defies Nazi ideology. Women, African Americans, and other marginalized groups are working in these factories, producing bombers at a rate that no one could have imagined. It shatters the myth of Nazi racial superiority and reveals a new kind of warfare, one of efficiency, inclusivity, and determination. With every new report, the pressure mounts. Canaris knows that if the Germans fail to acknowledge this industrial powerhouse, they will be doomed. The Allies' advantage is clear, but it is one the Nazis refuse to see. As the camera pans across a dimly lit war room, Canaris stands before a map of Europe, his eyes scanning the positions of German troops. He knows that the war cannot be won without the skies, but he also knows that even with all the intelligence in the world, the battle for air supremacy may already be lost. The question hangs in the air: how will this industrial revolution change the battlefield? Will the Germans finally believe the truth before it's too late? The summer of 1943 arrives, and the tension in the air is thick with the weight of inevitable change. The German leadership, still stubbornly clinging to outdated ideologies and misconceptions, continues to dismiss the reports flooding in from across the Atlantic. But the reality of American production is undeniable, and soon it will become clear just how catastrophic this oversight will be for the Axis powers. It begins with the relentless air raids over Europe. The Allied bombers, the B-17 Flying Fortress and B-24 Liberator, dominate the skies. As the German Luftwaffe tries to push back against the wave of bombers, they find themselves outmatched not just by numbers, but by the sheer efficiency and coordination of the American war machine. The Allies are no longer dependent on a few heroic pilots. They have overwhelming firepower that is constantly being replenished, a constant stream of bombers coming off the production lines in Michigan. The turning point is marked by one of the most critical air battles of the war. It is known as Big Week, a 6-day period in February of 1944, when more than 1,000 Allied bombers raid the heart of Germany's aircraft factories. The Germans, caught off guard by the sheer number of bombers and their unyielding accuracy, are forced into a defensive position. The Luftwaffe, already weakened by years of conflict on multiple fronts, is decimated. In the midst of this battle, a young German soldier, Wilhelm Fischer, finds himself in the cockpit of a Messerschmitt Bf 109, desperately trying to intercept the Allied bombers. As he soars through the sky, the familiar hum of his engine mingles with the distant roar of explosions. Below, the factories that had once been symbols of German might are now under attack by a relentless force. The realization hits him like a punch to the gut. He is fighting against an enemy that has the power to outlast him. Fischer's thoughts turn to his family, back in Germany, to the propaganda that told him the enemy was weak and disorganized. But now, as he watches the American bombers drop their payloads with terrifying precision, he knows that everything he has been told is a lie. Back in Michigan, on the factory floor of Willow Run, an entirely different kind of sacrifice is being made. Rose Willow Monroe, one of the women who had answered the call to work in the factory, stands side by side with thousands of others. Her hands, once unfamiliar with the tools of industry, now move with mechanical precision, fastening rivets to the body of a B-24 Liberator. "Every rivet we drove was going to help end the war," she says in an interview many years later, her voice tinged with both pride and sadness. "We worked double shifts sometimes, sleeping in the parking lot between shifts. We had brothers, husbands, sweethearts flying these planes. Every hour we spent in that factory meant more lives saved on the front lines." In the heart of Germany, however, the realization is far more bitter. General Hermann Göring, once so confident in the superiority of the Luftwaffe, now faces a harsh truth. The skies are no longer his domain, and the Luftwaffe is no longer the formidable force it once was. The numbers no longer lie. Germany is outmatched in the air, and the cost of this miscalculation will be felt for years to come. The turning point is not just a military defeat, it is a moral reckoning. The Germans, who had once believed their technological superiority would win the war, are now facing an industrial revolution they cannot understand, let alone defeat. The sacrifice of countless soldiers, factory workers, and civilians becomes clear. The battle for the skies has already been decided, and the cost of refusal to believe in American strength has been immeasurable. The question remains, how many lives could have been saved if Germany had accepted the truth when it was first presented? Would the war have ended sooner if they had seen the American industrial miracle for what it truly was? By the summer of 1944, the war had reached a tipping point. The Luftwaffe, once the pride of Nazi Germany, had been reduced to a shadow of its former self. The relentless aerial bombardment from the Allies had crippled German industry, and with it, the hopes of a swift victory. The Allies, fueled by the overwhelming production capacity of the United States, were now in full control of the skies. But the cost of this victory, both human and material, was staggering. In Germany, the situation was dire. Factories that once churned out weapons of war were now nothing more than rubble. The American bombers, including those from Willow Run, had leveled entire districts, crippling German manufacturing and production. But even as Germany faced imminent defeat, the resistance to the truth of American industrial might remain entrenched within the Nazi leadership. Admiral Canaris, the man who had tried to warn them, had already paid the price for his efforts. Having been removed from his position earlier that year, he was now a prisoner of the Gestapo, a victim of the very system he had tried to save. His warnings about the devastating capabilities of American production had been dismissed as defeatism, a fatal misstep that cost not only his career, but ultimately his life. In a darkened prison cell, Canaris reflects on the years he spent fighting for the truth, knowing now that his efforts were in vain. "We were drowned in intelligence," he writes in his final journal entry. "But we were punished for speaking the truth, and that is a price that no one should ever have to pay." Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the workers at Willow Run continue their tireless efforts. The production of bombers had not slowed, if anything, it had accelerated. In April of 1944, the Willow Run factory reached its peak production. More than 600 B-24 Liberators were completed in a single month. It was an unimaginable feat of industrial power, one that left the Germans scrambling to keep up. Yet the price of victory was steep. The cost of building these bombers had drained resources from both sides of the conflict. In Germany, the failure to recognize the significance of American industrial capacity had led to the misallocation of resources, money wasted on wonder weapons and ill-conceived strategies, rather than on defensive systems that could have countered the Allied air superiority. And while the United States was able to capitalize on its manufacturing might, the human cost of this industrial war was also staggering. Tens of thousands of young men and women, from all walks of life, had given their lives for this cause. In the factories of Michigan, African Americans, women, and immigrants worked side by side, embodying the very ideals of democracy that the Nazis had so deeply underestimated. As the camera pans over the wreckage of the German cities, the full scope of the destruction becomes painfully clear. For the German people, the defeat is not only military but also ideological. The failure to acknowledge American industrial power had cost them everything: their cities, their military might, and ultimately their place in history. The cost, however, does not end there. In a post-war world, the survivors of these battles are left to pick up the pieces. Many of the German soldiers, like Wilhelm Fischer, who had once believed in the superiority of the Third Reich, are left to confront the bitter reality of their mistakes. "What were we fighting for?" Fischer asks in a rare interview after the war. "We believed in a cause, but we were deceived. We were fighting against an enemy that didn't need to fight with brute force. They fought with the power of their industry, the strength of their people. And we failed to see that. The war ends, and the Allied victory is assured. But the question remains: how different would the outcome have been if Germany had believed the intelligence about American production in 1943? How many lives would have been spared if the Nazis had recognized the truth and adjusted their strategy accordingly? As the survivors of both sides reflect on the war's aftermath, one thing becomes clear. The conflict was not only one of armies and weapons, but of ideas. The Allies won not just through military might, but through the power of innovation, inclusion, and the belief in a future shaped by the strength of its people. The war is over. The ruins of Europe lie scattered across the horizon, but amid the devastation, a new world is emerging. The Allied victory is not just a military conquest, it is a testament to the power of industrial innovation, human resilience, and the ideals of democracy. The factories of Willow Run, which had once churned out bombers at a pace the world had never seen, stand as a monument to what can be achieved when a nation commits to its cause. Yet the true legacy of World War II is far more than just the defeat of the Axis powers. It is the realization that the power of a nation's industrial capacity can alter the very course of history. The B-24 Liberators, constructed in the heart of Michigan, helped tip the balance of power in the skies. The sheer scale of American production was a force that the German war machine could not hope to match. For the soldiers who fought, for the workers who built, and for the leaders who believed, the cost of victory was high. But the impact of the war extends far beyond the battlefields and factories. It has left an indelible mark on the very fabric of history. One of the greatest legacies of the war is the recognition of those who made it possible. The workers at Willow Run, often overlooked in the grand narrative of war, became known as the Riveters, symbolizing the strength and determination of women and marginalized groups who contributed to the war effort. Their contributions were vital, not only in producing aircraft, but in challenging long-held societal beliefs about gender and race. Rose Willow Monroe, one of the women who worked on the B-24 assembly line, became an iconic figure, her story of resilience and dedication inspiring generations to come. In Germany, however, the aftermath of the war was different. The Nazi leadership, who had refused to acknowledge the full potential of their enemies, paid the ultimate price. Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, who had seen the truth of American industrial power early on, was executed by the Nazis, a tragic casualty of the regime he had once served. But his death would not be in vain. His efforts to bring the truth to light would be remembered by future generations, a cautionary tale about the dangers of ideological blindness. For the German soldiers, like Wilhelm Fischer, who had fought with the belief that their cause was just, the post-war years were filled with questions and regret. Fischer, now an older man, reflects on the war with a somber understanding. "We thought we were superior," he says, his voice heavy with sorrow. "We failed to see that our strength was not in our machines or our ideology. It was in our ability to adapt, to believe in the future we were fighting for, and we failed to do that." In the years following the war, the world would see the rise of new global superpowers, the United States, bolstered by its industrial might, and the Soviet Union, strengthened by its vast resources and military strategies. The Cold War would follow, but the lessons of World War II would resonate across the globe. The story of Willow Run, of the workers who built the planes that helped win the war, would become a symbol not just of American strength, but of the power of unity and diversity in the face of adversity. And as history moves forward, the story of the failure of Nazi intelligence, the refusal to believe in the overwhelming industrial might of the United States, serves as a reminder. Reality does not bend to ideology. The lessons learned from that tragic mistake are profound. Leaders must be willing to face the truth, even when it contradicts their most cherished beliefs. The war may have ended, but its lessons live on, shaping the world we know today. The strength of a nation is not only measured by its weapons or its military strategy, it is found in its capacity to adapt, to innovate, and to believe in the power of its people. As we look to the future, one question remains. How will the world use these lessons? Will we learn from the past, or will we allow the mistakes of history to repeat themselves? In the coming days, we will explore another pivotal moment of the war, an event that would change the course of the Pacific Theater forever. Stay tuned to discover the untold stories behind the Battle of Midway.